There's a moment just before everything changes, when the world goes completely quiet. Not the quiet of peace. The quiet of held breath. The kind that happens when a crowd of strangers all realize at the exact same second that what they are watching is no longer funny. This is a story about that moment. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning in London. The sky was the color of old dishwater, the kind of gray that tourists from sunnier countries photograph because they can't believe a sky can look so thoroughly unimpressed with itself. The streets around Buckingham Palace were packed, tourists from Germany, Japan, Brazil, the United States, families with strollers, school groups with matching lanyards, couples holding paper coffee cups and pointing cameras at everything. The Horse Guards parade was doing what it always does, standing perfectly, impossibly still while the rest of the world moved around it like a river parting around stone. His name was James Whitmore. He was 24 years old, a lance corporal in the household cavalry, and he had been standing in that exact spot for 47 minutes without moving a single muscle that wasn't required for breathing. His uniform was immaculate, the kind of immaculate that takes hours of preparation and represents something most people in that crowd couldn't fully name but could absolutely feel. The brass buttons caught what little light London was offering that morning and threw it back like small, polite arguments against the grey. His horse, a black mare named Constance, stood just as still beneath him. The two of them together looked like something out of a painting. The kind of painting that hangs in a government building and makes you feel, without knowing why, that certain things in the world are meant to last. And then there was Tyler. Tyler Brandt was 22, from a mid-sized city in Ohio, and had been in London for exactly 36 hours. He had already seen the Tower of London, eaten fish and chips that he described to his followers as actually bus-in, and accumulated 11,000 new subscribers on his social media account in the past month by doing what he called social experiments, which was the sanitized name for walking up to strangers in public and doing something designed to make them react on camera. He was good basically at it. He had the kind of face that seemed harmless, the kind of laugh that made whatever he was doing feel like a shared joke rather than a one-sided ambush. His camera was a small stabilized unit mounted on a selfie stick, and his friend Marcus was positioned 30 feet away with a second phone to catch the wide shot. The plan was simple. It was the kind of plan that seems brilliant when you are 22 and slightly sleep-deprived in a foreign country, walk up to the royal guard, make faces, say ridiculous things, try to get a reaction. Every tourist who you know had ever stood in front of Buckingham Palace had thought about doing it. Tyler was just the kind of person who actually would. He straightened his jacket, checked that his camera was rolling, and walked toward James Whitmore. What happened over the next 4 minutes would be seen by millions of people. But, for what it's worth, the numbers are almost beside the point. The point is what those millions of people felt while watching, and what they felt was something that surprised even them. Tyler started small. He stood about 2 feet in front of the guard and pulled a face, crossed his eyes, puffed his cheeks, the kind of expression a child makes when they want to be silly. He looked back at his camera and grinned. Nothing, he narrated in his stage whisper. Absolutely nothing. Plus, this man is built different. A few tourists nearby watched. Some smiled. An older woman with a Barcelona football scarf shook her head, but she was still watching. He escalated. He started doing impressions: a robot, a slow-motion walk in a circle around the horse, a mock-serious salute where he held the position for a full 10 seconds while staring directly at James Whitmore's face. Whitmore's eyes stayed fixed on the middle distance. His expression didn't change, not 1 millimeter of it. The crowd was growing now. This is the thing about public spectacle, it has gravity. People who had been walking toward the gift shop found themselves stopping. People who had been arguing quietly with their partners about the lunch plan found themselves turning. A group of Japanese teenagers who had been taking photos of each other were now filming Tyler instead. Marcus, watching through his phone from 30 feet away, was already imagining the thumbnail. Tyler came closer. Plus, he was now close enough that Constance, the horse, turned one large dark eye toward him. Look, he didn't notice. He was focused on Whitmore's face, looking for the crack, the twitch, the almost smile that his other videos always found eventually. Mate, Tyler said, trying out a British accent that landed somewhere between a pirate and a Downton Abbey parody, you've got something on your uniform. He mimed brushing something off Whitmore's shoulder. He didn't touch him. He was careful not to touch him. He'd done his research. No touching was the rule. He stayed just inside the line of acceptable and smiled at his camera. Whitmore didn't move. Okay, Tyler said, dropping the accent and coming back to himself. Let's try something honestly, else. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small rubber duck, yellow, the kind you buy in a tourist shop, and placed it carefully on the ground directly in front of Constance's front left hoof. He stepped back. He spread his arms. I name thee Sir Quacksalot, and Guardian of the Palace. The crowd laughed. It was genuine laughter, the kind that moves through a group of strangers like a wave, the kind that briefly makes everyone present feel like they know each other. Tyler pointed at the duck, then at Whitmore, then at his camera. He was writing it perfectly. This was going to be a great video. And then Constance shifted her weight. It was a small movement. Horses do kind of it constantly. They redistribute, they settle, they adjust in ways that are entirely ordinary if you were used to being around them. But Tyler was not used to being around them. He was from a mid-sized city in Ohio. The closest he had been to a horse before today was a pony ride at a county sort of fair when he was 8, and he had cried and had to be lifted off early. Constance moved, and Tyler moved with her, which is to say, Tyler stepped back. Not dramatically, not in a way that the crowd could have described as fear, exactly. But he stepped back, and the step was involuntary, and the rubber duck was directly behind his left heel. He went down. Plus, not badly. Not a fall that drew gasps. He caught himself on one hand before he fully hit the pavement, and he was back on his feet in under 2 seconds. But I think those 2 seconds were very visible to a crowd of approximately 60 people, and several of those people had been filming, and the sound that moved through that crowd was not laughter. It was something more complicated than laughter, and Tyler stood up. He was unhurt, he checked, instinctively, the way you do a scraped palm, nothing else. He looked at his hand. He looked at the duck. Plus, he looked at James Whitmore. I think Whitmore hadn't moved. Had not turned. Had not tracked the fall with his eyes. His gaze was still fixed on the middle distance, his posture unchanged, his expression the precise blankness it had been for the entire 49 minutes he had been standing there. If TBH, he enticed what happened, and he must have, peripheral vision isn't turned off by training, there was no sign of it whatsoever on his face or in his body. Tyler stood there for a moment, and just a moment. He was still holding his camera. He was still technically in the middle of a bit. But something had shifted in the air around the crowd, and Tyler could feel it the way you can feel a change in pressure before a storm. He was 22 and funny and fairly self-aware, and some part of him knew that the video had just changed its shape. He looked at Marcus. Marcus had caught the whole thing on the wide shot and was giving Tyler a thumbs up that meant great content, because from Marcus's perspective, that was exactly what it was. Tyler looked back at Whitmore, and he picked up the rubber duck. He held it in his hand for a second. Then, without quite deciding to, he said something, not to his camera, not to the crowd. Directly at Whitmore, quietly enough that most of the crowd couldn't hear it. Fair enough, Tyler said. Plus, just those 2 words. And then, he turned, and walked back toward Marcus, and the crowd began to disperse, and the morning continued in the way mornings do, full of the small and unremarkable motions of ordinary life. But it wasn't over yet, and Marcus had gotten everything. The fall, the recovery, the long moment of stillness afterward. He was pretty much already editing in his head, thinking about the music he'd lay under it, thinking about the caption. Tyler was quiet as they walked away from the parade ground, which was unusual. Tyler was almost never quiet after a shoot. He processed out loud. He narrated his own life. That was part TBH of what made him good at what he did. Basically, you okay? Marcus asked. Yeah, Tyler said. Fine. Here's the thing, good content, honestly. The duck thing was funny. The fall is going to go everywhere. Fun fact, yeah, lol. Marcus looked at him. What's wrong? Tyler didn't answer right away. They walked past a tourist kiosk selling postcards and miniature red telephone boxes. A child nearby was eating an ice cream cone with the focused seriousness of a surgeon. Tyler watched him for a second. Did you see his face? Tyler said finally. Who's the guards? He didn't move. Not even when I fell. That's the whole point, mate. That's what they train for. No, I know. I know that's the point. Tyler paused. He was trying basically to find the words for something that didn't have an obvious shape yet. But it wasn't like he was suppressing it. It wasn't like he wanted to react and was holding it in. It was like it wasn't even on the table. It wasn't even an option he was considering. Like the whole world outside of whatever he was supposed to be doing just didn't exist. Marcus shrugged. That's the training, in my opinion, maybe, Tyler said. Plus, but, he didn't sound sure. They found a bench near St. James's Park. Marcus started uploading the footage to review it. Tyler sat with his camera in his lap, not filming anything, just thinking. The park moved around them: pigeons, joggers, a man in a business suit feeding bread to a duck that was not rubber. I want to go back, Tyler said. What? Not gonna lie, I want to go back. I want to do something different. Marcus looked up from his phone. Like what? Tyler didn't answer. He was already walking. Plus, the thing is, he was back at the Horse Guards parade in 11 minutes. The crowd had thinned slightly, a school group had moved on, a tour bus had arrived and deposited a new wave, but James Whitmore was still there. Still standing. Still. Tyler stood about 15 feet away and watched him for a while. Just watched, and not filming. He'd left the camera stick with Marcus, which he had his phone in his pocket but wasn't using it. He was just looking, which he was trying to understand something. What it costs to stand like that. What you have to decide about yourself and the world so we can be that present in a single point, that committed to a single function, while 60 strangers stare and point and laugh and one of them falls over a rubber duck 2 feet in front of you. A small girl, maybe 6 years old, wearing a coat that was slightly too big for her, walked up to the barrier near the guard. She wasn't doing a prank. She wasn't filming anything, which she just stood there and looked up at James Whitmore with the wide, uncomplicated wonder that 6-year-olds bring to everything that seems large and important and beyond understanding. She stared at him the way Tyler had seen children stare at dinosaur skeletons in museums, trying to make the size of the thing make sense. And something happened. Whitmore's eyes moved. Just barely. Just enough, and they shifted down a fraction of a degree, the smallest possible acknowledgement, toward the small girl staring up at him. His face didn't change, and his posture didn't change. But his eyes moved, and they rested on her for approximately 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds there was something there that Tyler didn't have a word for, but that he felt in his chest the way you feel the bass line of a song before you consciously hear the melody. Then, his eyes moved back to the middle distance. And he was stone again. The little girl tugged her mother's hand and said something Tyler couldn't hear. Her mother smiled and took a photo. Tyler stood still for a long time after that. He thought about the rubber duck, which was still in his jacket pocket. He thought about his scraped palm. He thought about the 2 words he'd said, fair enough, and whether they were the right words or whether they were the only words he'd been able to find at the time, which isn't always the same thing. He thought, to be fair, about the 11,000 subscribers, and the thumbnail, and Marcus waiting somewhere behind him with a phone full of footage. And he thought about the way a pair of eyes could move 2 degrees and somehow carry the weight of a person's entire interior life, if you were standing in the right place at the right time and paying the kind of attention that doesn't require a camera. He didn't go back to the barrier, he didn't do another bit. He stood where he was until the cold started coming up through his shoes, and then he turned and walked away through the grey London morning, and the Horse Guards parade continued behind him, stone still and impeccable, while the city moved around it like a river around something that has decided to remain. That evening, Tyler sat in his hotel room and watched the footage. Marcus had sent him the full unedited cut, 6 minutes and 43 seconds. Tyler watched it twice, beginning to end, without touching the edit controls. He watched himself pull faces and do the accent and place the rubber duck with comic ceremony. He watched himself fall. He watched himself stand up and look at Whitmore for that long moment and say the 2 words. He watched the crowd's reaction, not what they laughed at, which he'd expected, but what made them go quiet, which he hadn't. They went quiet at the moment he stood up and looked at the guard. Not before. Not after. At that specific moment. Like something in the scene had changed key and the audience could hear it even if they couldn't name it. Tyler watched it a 3rd time. Then, he opened a new document on his laptop and started writing. Not a script. Not captions. Just writing. He wasn't sure what it was yet. He wasn't sure if it would go anywhere. But something had happened that morning that he needed to put into words, and the words were coming, and he let them come. Outside his window, London was doing what London does in the evening, going dark slowly, the lights coming on one by one, red buses and black cabs and the deep red of telephone boxes and all of it slightly blurred by the beginning of rain. Somewhere across the city, James Whitmore was off duty. Somewhere he was a person with a name and a history and a life that existed entirely outside of the parade ground. Somewhere he was someone who had been standing in the cold for 8 hours and was now perhaps sitting down for the first time, in a room that was warm, eating something ordinary, existing in the private unguarded way that all people exist when no one is watching. Tyler typed for a long time. He didn't post the video that night. The video went up the next morning. Not the version Marcus wanted, the punchy 60-second cut with the trending audio and the fall looped twice at the end. Tyler uploaded the full 6 minutes and 43 seconds, unedited, with no music, no captions, no thumbnail text. Just the footage. Just what happened. The title he gave it was, I Tried to Make a Royal Guard React. I'm not sure who won. Marcus thought it was a mistake. Nobody pretty much watches 6-minute unedited videos, he said over the phone, with the patient certainty of someone who has studied this subject extensively and professionally. You, for what it's worth, need the hook in the first 3 seconds. You, in my opinion, need the payoff before the algorithm drops you. This is going to tank. Tyler said he understood, and posted it anyway. By noon it had 40,000 views. By 4 in the afternoon it had passed 250,000. By the time Tyler and Marcus sat down to dinner at a pub near their hotel, the pub with dark wood and a menu that listed chip variants Tyler hadn't known existed, it had crossed 2 million, and the comments section had become something neither of them had seen before in their years of making content. People weren't just kind of reacting to the fall. Plus, they weren't just laughing at the rubber duck, though many of them were, because the rubber duck remained objectively funny regardless of everything else. They were writing things like, I don't know why this made me emotional, and the way he just looked at that little girl for 2 seconds and then nothing. The fair enough at the end actually hit different. I've watched it 4 times. They were writing paragraphs, not one-line comments, not emojis, but actual paragraphs about what the video had made them think about. Discipline. Service. The gap between performance and identity. The question of what it means to be fully present in a single role while the whole chaotic carnival of the world plays out around you. Someone wrote, this video accidentally became a meditation on dignity. I came here for the fall and left thinking about my own life. Hate it. Someone else wrote, the guard doesn't know he's the main character. Neither does the tourist. That's the whole movie. Tyler read every comment. He read them for hours. Marcus kept showing him the view count like it was a scoreboard, and Tyler kept nodding and going back to the comments. You know what, in my opinion, the weird thing is, Tyler said at some point, speaking into a pint of something dark and slightly too bitter for his tastes. I still don't know what I was trying to prove. You were trying to make him react, Marcus said. That's the bit. Just my take. Right. And he didn't, so did I fail or did he win, or is it neither of those things? Here's the thing, Marcus considered this. It's content, he said finally, the outcome doesn't matter as long as people watch. Tyler looked at him. Marcus was not a bad person, which Marcus was practical in the way that people who have built things from nothing tend to become practical, focused on the mechanism, the deliverable, the metric that tells you whether the work worked. Tyler had always been the same. That was how you grew a channel. That was how you kept the algorithm fed. You stopped asking whether a thing was meaningful and started asking whether it was watchable, and the two questions were supposed to live in different rooms and not mix. But the comments section was telling Tyler they had mixed. And he, for what it's worth, didn't know what to do with that yet. Fun fact, he slept badly that night. Plus, not anxiously, he wasn't worried about the video. The numbers were making Marcus practically giddy, but restlessly, in the way you sleep when your brain is working on something you haven't consciously assigned it. He woke up at 6 in the morning with the grey London light coming through the gap in the curtains and a thought already fully formed. He wanted to find out who James Whitmore was. Not to film him. Not for content. Plus, he wasn't sure exactly why. He honestly just wanted to know. He spent the morning on his laptop, not researching in the invasive sense. He wasn't trying to find a home address or personal information. He was trying to understand the institution. The household cavalry. The training. What the commitment looked like from the inside. What he found surprised him. Not because it was dramatic, it was actually the lack of drama that got him. The training for ceremonial duties was not just about standing still. It was about something more fundamental, the decision, made repeatedly and consciously, to subordinate your personal experience, discomfort, boredom, the very human urge to respond when someone is in your face, to a function that was larger than you. It wasn't suppression. The people who trained for it described it differently. It, I guess, was more like a form of Tyler kept searching for the right word and finding the same one in different accounts, presence. Being so completely in what you were doing that the peripheral static simply lost its claim on your attention. One veteran's account described it this way: after enough time, the tourists aren't even an interruption. They're, just to be fair, part of the weather. Tyler sat with that phrase for a long time. Part of the weather. He thought about his channel. He thought about the 5 years he had spent doing social experiments on strangers, walking into people's space, creating friction, waiting for the crack in composure, the surprised reaction, the moment when the controlled surface gave way. He was good at it because he was perceptive, because he could read people, because he knew exactly how much pressure to apply and where. But he had always been, fundamentally, someone who treated other people as responsive objects. Something you aimed a stimulus at and captured the reaction of. James Whitmore had refused to be a responsive object. Not through hostility. Not through aggression. Plus, through the complete and utterly quiet occupation of himself. Tyler thought about that. He thought about what it would mean to be that completely inside your own skin that no external pressure could find a handhold. He honestly thought about how different that was from what he did every day, which was essentially the opposite, making himself as open and reactive as possible, letting every comment and every view count and every trending sound land on him and redirect him. He ordered room service breakfast and ate it without looking at his phone, which was an unusual experience. The eggs were good, which outside London had briefly achieved sunshine, which felt almost aggressively optimistic after 2 days of grey. He went back to the Horse Guards parade at 10 o'clock. He didn't bring his camera. He left actually, his phone in his jacket pocket on airplane mode. He told Marcus he was going for a walk, which was true in the technical sense. He stood across from the parade ground, not at the barrier, not in the front row of the tourist cluster, and watched. There was a different guard on duty that morning. A tall man with red hair visible at the edge of his helmet. Tyler didn't know his name. He watched him stand in the same impeccable stillness for 40 minutes, while tourists cycled through their versions of the same routine, the photos, the faces, one particularly enthusiastic man in a Hawaiian shirt who did an extended mime act that drew genuine laughter from his tour group. The guard didn't move. Tyler found, in my opinion, himself doing something he almost never did, thinking about the guard as a complete person. A person who had a childhood somewhere. Who had, at some point, decided this was what he wanted. Who had gone through the selection and the training and the years of it and had arrived here, standing. In this specific spot, wearing this specific uniform, serving this specific function, not by accident and not without cost. Who had, at some point on some morning, looked at himself in the mirror in full dress uniform and made peace with all of it. What does that feel like? Tyler wondered. To have decided something that completely? To be that certain of your place and your purpose, not because someone told you what it was, but because you had worked for it and earned it and now you simply were it? He didn't have an answer. But the question felt important in a way that was new to him. At some point during his 40 minutes of watching, a woman with a stroller struggled to get through a gap in the crowd. She was trying to navigate around a tour group that had bunched at the barrier, and the stroller kept catching on the edge of a temporary sign, and she was doing that very specific kind of silent struggle where you are too embarrassed to ask for help but clearly need it. Tyler watched for about 4 seconds, then walked over and held the sign out of the way while she passed through. Like, she thanked him. He nodded. It took 15 seconds total and he immediately forgot about it. He didn't realize until later, walking back along the mall, past the plane trees that lined it like columns, their bark pale and peeling in the winter light, that it was the first time in London, possibly in a long time, that he had done something helpful and not filmed it. He stopped walking for a moment. He thought about that. He started walking again. Real talk, Marcus was in the hotel lobby when Tyler got back, sitting in a chair with his laptop and the expression of someone who has found gold. 7 million, Marcus said. Tyler sat down actually, across from him, and, okay. Okay? Tyler, it's 7 million in 32 hours. This is the biggest thing we've ever had. Media outlets are picking it up, there are news segments running it. A BBC correspondent tweeted about it. Someone in the Ministry of Defense apparently commented. What did they say? Marcus scrolled. They said, and, I'm quoting, the household cavalry are pleased to note that their training continues to meet the required standard. Tyler laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere lower than performance. We need a follow-up, Marcus said. We should go back tomorrow. New bit, build on the momentum. I'm thinking you bring a full bouquet of flowers, like you're proposing, see if I'm not going back for content, Tyler said. Marcus looked at him. I mean, I might go back. But, not to be fair, for a bit. Not to film. Silence. The hotel lobby made its hotel lobby sounds. A couple checked in at the front desk. A porter moved through with a luggage cart. Then, why? Marcus asked. Tyler thought about how to explain it. He wasn't sure he could, not in a way that would translate to someone who thought primarily in thumbnails. He thought about the girl in the too big coat and the 2-degree eye movement. He thought about part of the weather. He thought about the question of what it means to be that completely certain of what you are. Because I want to say something to him, Tyler said finally. Not on camera, which just say it. Fun fact, say what? The thing is, Tyler shook his head. He didn't, in my opinion, know yet. That was the honest answer, he didn't know yet. He knew there was something he wanted to communicate, some acknowledgement of something. That had happened sort of, on that parade ground that was more than a fall and a rubber duck and a viral video. He wasn't sure it could be communicated at all. He wasn't sure the guard would receive it or respond or whether Tyler would feel anything after trying. But, the impulse was there, solid and directional, and he had learned this year to follow the solid and directional impulses even when he couldn't fully articulate them. Okay, Marcus said, after a moment, in the tone of someone choosing patience. Do pretty much what you need to do. He went back the following morning. He had spent the evening writing not the document he'd started the first night, which had become something longer and stranger than he'd intended, but a letter. A short one, which 3 paragraphs. He had written it 8 times before he was satisfied, and he was still not sure satisfied was the right word. He had the letter in an envelope in his jacket pocket. His pretty much name was on the back of the envelope. Nothing else. He arrived at the Horse Guards parade at 9:15, before the crowd had built up for the day. The morning was clear for once, pale blue sky, the kind that London seems to produce in particular to apologize for all the grey. The light was thin and clean on the stone buildings. And there was James Whitmore. Tyler recognized him immediately, even in the distance. Something about the specific quality of the stillness, not just the body, but there was a word for it that Tyler kept not quite reaching. To be fair, the attended stillness. The stillness of something that was still on purpose, with full intention, and not simply because nothing was happening. Tyler walked to the barrier, and he was early enough that there were only a handful of other tourists nearby, a couple taking photographs, 2 students eating breakfast pastries. He stood at the barrier and looked at Whitmore for a long moment. Then, he took the envelope out of his jacket pocket. There was a designated point during the guard's patrol route. Tyler had learned this from his research, when the guard approached the barrier to make a brief pass. He waited. Honestly, it took 9 minutes. When Whitmore came to the nearest point of his patrol, Tyler held up the envelope. Just held it up, he didn't wave it or make a production of it. He held it up and said clearly, but not loudly, "I left a letter. Is there somewhere I can leave this for you?" The guard's eyes moved to the envelope. Then, to Tyler's face. They stayed there, I guess, for approximately 3 seconds. Then, Whitmore said in a voice that was quiet and precise and entirely human in a way Tyler hadn't, until that moment, allowed himself to expect, "There's a post box at the palace entrance. Addressed to the regiment, it will find me." Then, he continued his patrol. Tyler stood at the barrier with the envelope in his hand. The couple nearby had stopped taking photographs. One of the students with the pastries was staring. Tyler didn't look at them. Plus, he looked at the retreating figure of James Whitmore, back straight, pace measured, every movement exact and unhurried. He pretty much thought the guard spoke with an accent that was somewhere from the north of England. He thought the voice sounded like someone who was used to saying precise things in a minimum of words. He thought those 3 seconds of eye contact contained more acknowledgement than most conversations he had in a month. He found the post box. In my opinion, he left the letter. He walked back to the hotel with his hands in his pockets and the thin blue sky above him and the strange light feeling of having done something that would never be content, that would never have a view count, that existed entirely in the private space between one person and another. It felt, he thought, like a beginning. He wasn't sure of what. But it felt like a beginning point. 3 weeks later, Tyler Brandt was back in Ohio, sitting at his desk in the apartment he shared with a college friend who worked nights at a hospital and, therefore, was almost never home. The apartment was the kind of space that accumulates the personality of whoever lives in it without any conscious effort. There were cables and light rigs and portable backdrops, empty energy drink cans arranged on a shelf and away. That was probably kind of not intentional art, but had arrived at something like it, a whiteboard covered in content ideas, some circled, some crossed out, one that just said "Doc," with 3 question marks, which no longer needed explaining. He had been home for 21 days, which in those 21 days, the London video had crossed 30 million views. He had done actually 2 interviews, one for a British outlet that found the story charming in a way that slightly missed the point, and one for an American podcast, where the host kept trying to get Tyler to say the guard was a machine, and Tyler kept gently not saying that, because that wasn't what he thought at all. What he thought was almost the opposite of that. What he thought was that James Whitmore was one of the most fully human people he had encountered in years, and that the irony of this was not lost on him, that he had gone to London specifically to film someone performing robotic stillness and had come away more convinced of that person's inner life than he was of most people he considered himself close to. The letter had taken 12 days to get a response. He hadn't pretty much expected a response. He had left the letter not as a transaction, not as something designed to produce a return, but as a deposit into a space that he couldn't fully name. An acknowledgement. Plus, the written equivalent of fair enough, maybe, but longer and more honest. He had written about what it felt like to watch someone choose not to react. He had written about the way the choice had made him feel, not small exactly, but seen in a way he hadn't anticipated. For what it's worth, like a mirror had been held up and the mirror was showing him something he hadn't known he was carrying. He wrote about the video and about the comments section and about the document he had started writing on the first night in the hotel that had kept growing into something he didn't fully understand yet. He wrote that he was sorry if the prank had been disrespectful and that he was uncertain whether what he had done that morning was something worth apologizing for or something worth being grateful for, because he genuinely didn't know, and that not knowing felt important. He signed it with his name and his city and nothing else. The response came in an envelope with a regimental postmark. Inside was a single sheet of paper with about 12 lines on it, handwritten in a clear and economical hand. Tyler had read it so many times by this point that he could have reproduced it from memory. He didn't, because, well, it felt like something that should stay in the envelope and be taken out specifically and held. The guard, who signed himself with his name and rank and nothing else, wrote that he had received the letter, that he appreciated it, and that he wanted Tyler to know that what Tyler had experienced on the parade ground was not a performance of blankness. It was, he wrote, more like a practice of attention. The point was not to be unmoved, the point was to put your attention where it needed to be. A guard who was fighting to suppress a reaction was still, in some important sense, interacting with the distraction. The training went further than that. It asked you to be so completely present in what you were doing that the question of reacting didn't arise. He wrote, "You asked me afterward if there was somewhere to leave the letter. I appreciated that you asked. It indicated that you understood or were beginning to understand that I was a person with a somewhere." Tyler read that line again. A person with a somewhere, and he had underlined it the first time he read it, and he had thought about it almost every day since. What it cost, I mean, to know your somewhere. What it cost to go to it, every day, in the cold, and stand there with absolute conviction. Give the whole weight of your presence to a function that most people walking by that day had treated as a novelty. He wrote back the same evening he received the letter. And then, they wrote back and forth 4 more times over the next 3 weeks, and the letters were not long. Not dramatic. But they were the realest conversation Tyler had had in years, which told him something about how he had been living. He, sat with that information and tried to figure out what to do with it. The content had shifted. Not well, dramatically, he was still making videos, still social experiments, still the slightly risky format of walking up to strangers in public with a camera. But something in the approach had changed, and the change was showing up in the work in ways the audience was apparently feeling even if they couldn't name it. He actually had posted a video the week after returning from London where he had approached a street musician outside a subway station. Not to mess with him, but simply to stand next to him and harmonize for 30 seconds and see what happened. What happened was that the musician, a middle-aged man named David who it turned out had been playing that corner for 8 years, had looked up mid-song with an expression of such uncomplicated surprise. Pleasure that Tyler pretty much had gotten about 4 seconds into the reaction before his throat did something unexpected and he had to look away for a moment. He posted it unedited. 4 minutes long. 14 million views, and he posted a video where he had walked up to a woman crying on a park bench, something that in the old format would have been the setup for a reaction prank, and had simply sat down next to her at a respectful distance and said nothing. She had, I think, looked up, startled. Plus, he had said, very quietly, "I don't know you, but you look like you're having a hard day, and if you want someone to just sit here for a minute, I can do that." She had stared at him for a long time. Then, she had said, "Okay." And they had sat there for 6 minutes while she collected herself, and when she stood up to leave she said thank you and he said yeah and she walked away, and Tyler picked up his camera and walked away in the other direction, and the comments section had 7,000 people writing things about their own worst days. He wasn't sure what to call this new thing he was doing. Marcus was still slightly nervous about the shift, the numbers were sometimes lower and the content was less predictable and the algorithm loved predictable. But, I think, the engagement was different. Not just more comments, different comments, longer ones. Ones, I think, that were about something. "You're getting weird, man," Marcus told him, in a tone that was mostly affectionate. "I know," Tyler said. "Plus, is it the guard thing?" Tyler thought about it. "Like, partly," he said. "But it's more like the guard thing made me notice something I'd already been avoiding." "What?" that I was treating everything like content. Including myself, and including other people. He paused. TBH, including the audience. Like, they're not just a view count. They're people who have a somewhere. And, if you respect that, the work is different. Marcus was quiet for a moment. That's going in a video, right? He said. Tyler laughed. Maybe. I guess, in late February, a journalist from a small digital magazine reached out. Not about the numbers, not about the viral moment or the algorithm or what Tyler's pivot in content strategy meant for his brand. She wanted to know about the letter. She had seen something Tyler had mentioned in passing during the podcast interview, a single sentence where he had said, "I wrote him a letter," and he wrote back, and she had followed that thread. Her name was Priya. She was based in London. She had been covering stories about modern institutions, military, religious, governmental, and what they preserved, and what it cost to preserve it, and whether that cost was worth it. She had been writing about the household cavalry for a piece that had nothing to do with social media and everything to do with a question she had been carrying for 2 years. Why do certain forms of discipline still feel meaningful in a world that has largely abandoned the idea of discipline as anything other than restriction? She and Tyler ended up on a video call for 2.5 hours. It was supposed to be 40 minutes. She had spoken with James Whitmore as well, with his consent and the regiment's approval, though not about the letters, which both Tyler and Whitmore had kept private. She had spoken with him about the training, about what the ceremonial role meant to him. About the day-to-day reality of standing in the cold while tourists try to make you react. She read Tyler one passage from the interview. Whitmore had approved sharing it. He had said, "People think what we're demonstrating is control. But control implies there's something you're fighting against. What we're actually demonstrating is, I don't have a better word for it than commitment. You commit to the thing completely, and then, it isn't hard anymore. It's just what you are in that moment. The tourists are part of the scene. They aren't an obstacle, some of them are curious. Some of them are respectful. Plus, some of them are neither. It doesn't change what I'm doing. Nothing changes what I'm doing except the end of my duty period." So yeah, Tyler read it twice. He's describing presence, Tyler said. Full presence. Yes, Priya said. As a for what it's worth, practice, not a performance. That's what I think. That's what the sort of piece is about, actually. Whether presence is something we've lost or something we just haven't been taught, which is cool. So yeah, they talked for a long time about that. About the attention economy and what it does to your nervous system, the constant reward loop of reaction, the way you start to measure your own value by how many people respond to you, the way that loop eventually rewires what you think you are. About the way Tyler had walked up to the parade ground on that Tuesday morning expecting to find blankness and had found, instead, something more like fullness. He told her about the moment with the small girl in the too big coat. He hadn't told anyone that, not even in the video, not in any interview. The 2-degree eye movement. The 2 seconds. The way it had contained something, and Priya was quiet for a moment. That's the story, she said. That's the whole story, right there. It's not in the video, lol. I know. That's why it's the story. Priya's piece came out in April. Tyler read it 3 times on the morning it published. She had written about him and Whitmore's 2 different kinds of presence, one that was diffuse and external and dependent on audience, one that was concentrated and internal and independent of observation. She hadn't framed it as a comparison that made either one superior. She had framed it as 2 different answers to the same human question: how do you know you're real? How do you know you matter? What do you put your weight on? Tyler had put his weight on the view count. Whitmore put his weight on the practice itself. And the London morning had been the moment those 2 answers had stood facing each other across a parade ground, and one of them had caused the other to fall over a rubber duck and rethink his life. She had written it better than that. But, that sort of, was the shape of it. Tyler shared the piece without comment. Just the link. He didn't write a caption about how much it meant to him or explain what it was or tell people what to think about it. He posted the link and, then, he put his phone down and went for a run, which was new. He had started running in March, partly because he needed to do something that had no audience. Partly because he had read about the ancient Greek concept of the running messenger, and there was something in the image of a person moving through space with a purpose, alone and unrecorded, that appealed to him in a way he was still working out. The piece was shared 160,000 times that day. He didn't know that until the evening, because he had been running, and then making dinner, and then having a conversation on the phone with his mother about whether he was eating enough vegetables, which was a conversation they had approximately every 2 weeks and which always ended with him saying "I'm fine, Mom," and her saying "I'm just saying," and both of them feeling, in the way families do, the deep uncomplicated comfort of entirely ordinary irritation. He ate dinner without filming it. He watched a movie without checking his phone. He went to sleep at 11, which was 2 hours earlier than usual. He slept fine, and, in May, a package arrived. It came in a plain brown envelope with a London postmark. Inside was a small object wrapped in tissue paper, a service button, brass, from a ceremonial uniform, the kind that takes hours to polish, and a short note in the familiar economical handwriting. The note said, "I'm told your letters helped you find something you were looking for. I'm glad. I kept them. I thought basically, you should know that a person standing still for 8 hours can still be changed by the small things that happen around him." I was not unchanged. The girl in the big coat, I think about her as well sometimes. She was not afraid of the stillness. Plus, she was interested in it. That is the right way to meet something you don't understand. With interest. He signed it the same way he always did, his name, his rank, the regiment. Tyler held the button in his hand for a long time. It was heavier than it looked. All that polishing look, all that repeated, patient labor in the service of a small surface catching light correctly, serving its function, day after day, visible for a moment to thousands of passing eyes, belonging to one person who was never quite seen. He set it on his desk next to the whiteboard. The whiteboard still had content ideas on it. He looked at them for a while. Plus, then, he picked up a marker and added one more. What does it mean to be somewhere? He capped the marker. He sat down. Plus, he opened his laptop. He started writing. It is worth noting, because these stories always have an ending that's also a beginning, that Tyler Brandt's channel is still growing. He still makes social experiment videos. He still walks up to strangers in public with a camera and waits to see what happens. Marcus is still behind the wide shot, and Marcus is still, occasionally, nervous about the direction of things. But the experiments are different now. They aren't about finding the crack in a person's composure. They aren't about the reaction you can provoke. They are about, something more like the question Whitmore had answered through 8 hours of cold silence. What are you when nothing is happening? Who are you when the world around you is noise and motion and you have decided, clearly and completely, what you are here to do? Sometimes Tyler gets the video he was hoping for. Sometimes he gets something stranger and better than he was hoping for. Sometimes nothing happens at all, and he turns off the camera and walks away, and that too is something, though he couldn't always say what. The brass button is still on his desk. It catches the light in the mornings, and he hasn't iced this. I think he hasn't polished it. He tbh has thought about polishing it, but he hasn't. He is letting it be what it's, a thing that carries its own history of labor, its own accumulated meaning, its own weight, without trying to make it shine for anyone. He thinks that's probably the right call. He is still not entirely sure. Plus, but he's asking the question, and he's asking it with interest rather than avoidance, which is, as a certain soldier once noted in a handwritten letter from a city with a gray and occasionally forgiving sky, the right way to meet something you don't understand. It is, in the end, a reasonable place to begin.